You know, we have started a new series on our national platform where we just go out and find some of the most fascinating stories that goes back to our history that you've never heard of, authors who are self-published. And today, our guest is Jerrilynn. That's right. You've not heard of Jerrilynn, but Jerrilynn Macgregor, and there she is a historian and author. Her story is one about forging freedom, the story of Hunter's Iron Works and the American Revolution. And she's our very special guest for the next half hour. Jerrilynn, welcome to the broadcast, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's good that you're interested. I appreciate it.
You know, my very good friend, Hunter Morin, made the introduction in Fredericksburg, Virginia. You know, who was James Hunter, and what inspired him to establish Hunter's Iron Works at Colonial, Virginia?
Hunter was a Scottish merchant and tobacco shipper, and his father sent him over to Fredericksburg around 1749 to help with their store in the town of Fredericksburg. And so that's what put James over here. He was about 28 years old when he came. And he very quickly realized that there was no nearby source of iron. Most of the iron works that had been in the region had either closed or were only operating sporadically. So that he saw it as a business opportunity.
So why was the Chesapeake region, Jerrilynn, significant for iron manufacturing during the colonial era?
Because the Chesapeake Bay is surrounded by large deposits of high-quality iron ore. So when the colonists arrived and they were looking around, the iron ore was close to the surface, they could see it. And because they had the iron ore and they had an abundant supply of timber for making charcoal, the industry, basic elements of the industry were set and ready to go.
How did Hunter transform Stafford County's landscape to accommodate his ironworks, including the canal and dam system?
He started out with a furnace, but he very quickly wanted to diversify just simply smelting pig iron into making manufactured items for sale, which was not allowed by the English government, but he was going to do that anyway. The manufacturing process required water power. And so he built his furnace very close to the Rappahannock River, and in order to use or utilize the water from the river for water power for his shops, he built a canal. It was about 3/4 of a mile long and came down running parallel to the shoreline, and he built shops down at the bottom end of that canal that were powered by the water.
What types of domestic goods, Jerrilynn, were produced at Hunter's Iron Works, and why were they so essential for colonial life?
Well, everyone at that time depended upon iron for just daily living. So you needed nails, you needed hardware for your house, hinges, you needed cooking pots, flax heckles for processing your flax into linen cloth, tools, all of your hammers, your farm implements, everything of that sort was made of iron. So there was a good business opportunity there if Hunter was able to supply it. So obviously he started out this operation catering to a domestic market.
How did Hunter's hiring, you know, we speak a lot about immigrants and migrants today, but the Quakers were such a big deal during this colonial period. So how did Hunter's hiring of skilled Quaker tradesmen reflect his approach to business and manufacturing during that time in our history?
Well, if you remember, I said that Hunter was a tobacco shipper. He was in the mercantile trade. He really knew nothing about iron manufacturing. But Hunter was intelligent enough to know what he did not know. And so in order to make his ironworks a business success, he hired people who were on the cutting edge of iron manufacturing technology of that time. The Quakers had become involved with iron smelting and forging and other manufacturing processes in England many, many years prior to America being founded. And so they pretty much dominated English skilled trades in the iron industry. Once the colonies here started trying to set up iron works in the Chesapeake region, they also utilized Quaker workers.
Forging Freedom, Jerrilynn Macgregor, the story of Hunter's ironworks and the American Revolution. That is the title of her new book. And we'll be back with so much more. From plowshares to swords, Rappahannock Forge, and the Revolution. Jerrilynn Macgregor, historian and author, they call Stafford home, the development of Stafford County, Virginia from 1600 until 1865. How did Hunter's Iron Works, Jerrilynn, shift from domestic to military production during the American Revolution?
Hunter was already set up with a massive manufacturing capability. He had all types of equipment, water-powered equipment for forging, for rolling out plate, sheet metal, for slitting iron into usable bars. And he had been using this equipment to create items for domestic sales. So shifting to manufacturing items necessary for an army really wasn't that difficult since all of the infrastructure was already set up.
Well, who was John Strode, Jerrilynn, and why was his leadership critical in transitioning Hunter's facility to wartime manufacturing and the impact that this had?
John Strode was a Quaker from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He came down probably around 1760 with the first influx of Quaker tradesmen that Hunter hired. He was a millwright by training, but just an amazing engineer. And it was Strode who actually made the shift from domestic production to arms and items necessary for the Army. He just had a gift for that, and he was dedicated to doing that.
Now, this is a leading question because this becomes the introduction of real weaponry to the American Revolution, which really made the difference and separated us from the rest of the world. What types of weapons were produced at Rappahannock Forge, Jerrilynn, and what made them significant to Virginia's war effort?
He was producing muskets, pistols, a very large gun called an amuzet, also was doing at least some carbines, and then of course was doing horsemen's swords as well. What made Hunter's so significant for this was that prior to the Revolution, America did not have any facilities for manufacturing guns or other types of arms. And so when the men started coming forth to join the Army, it was basically a BYOG operation, bring your own gun. So many of these men had guns that had belonged to their fathers. They had brought them home from the French and Indian War. Some of them had guns of English manufacture or French manufacture, but many of them were old, many needed repair, and there really wasn't an infrastructure in America for doing that on a large scale. Hunter's was different because it was already set up on a large scale, and at the outset of the Revolution, it commenced growing in size and scope.
Wow. How critical, Jerrilynn, was the iron supply from Hunter Iron's work, especially considering John Stroh's urgent September 1777 letter to Patrick Henry requesting support for wartime production?
We don't have any ledgers, excuse me, from Hunter's operations, but we know that he was smelting his own iron. He was also purchasing iron from up on the Occoquan River from another furnace up there. We also believe that he may have been bringing iron ore from Maryland and over from Spotsylvania. So the ore was a major issue with just obtaining that. And what Strode was doing was trying to ensure that even with British shipping blockades, that Hunter was still going to be able to obtain enough iron, and therefore they took over the iron mines that were still up around the then defunct Accokeek Iron Works just north of Hunter's.
Describe for us the impressive scale, Jerrilynn, of the Rappahannock Forge Armory, what made it unique among colonial manufacturing facilities?
One of the things that John Strode asked Patrick Henry for was an armory for his gunsmiths. And he specified that he needed a building 300 feet long. That is a massive structure at that point in time. We know from a clerk's account that the building was 4 stories in height. The lower level had all of the water-powered gearing. The basement, the first floor of it was where the gun-making equipment and the gunsmiths worked. The third floor, excuse me, was where the workmen lived, and the top floor, the 4th floor, was where the finished products were kept. This is just a huge operation. Now keep in mind that at that point in time, there is no way of mass producing guns or anything else for that matter. So each piece of each gun was manufactured separately, specifically to be assembled at the end of the assembly line into a specific weapon.
You know, when Jerrilynn and I continue, we're going to talk about iron, guns, and of course politics, and the challenges associated with wartime production. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
let's stop the politicking, let's stop the games, let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Talk about the challenges that James Hunter faced in maintaining the production during the Revolutionary War, and why did he also seek legislative protection, such as preventing the impressment of his workers and equipment?
Hunter's operation, whether it was for the smelting of iron or for the manufacture into whatever the finished product was going to be, was dependent upon his ability to find, pay, and retain skilled tradesmen. You could not just find somebody out on the plantation and bring them in to do that type of work. So Hunter needed protection for these men so that they were not drafted into the Army. That was a part of the Act for the Encouragement of Ironworks, which John Strode had asked for, so that those workers were safe from the draft and could remain. Obviously, we talked about the challenges of getting the raw material, iron ore, to work with. And then the other challenge was being able to pay his workers. Virginia went into the Revolution pretty much bankrupt. So it was a constant battle to be able to obtain the money to pay these men.
What about the rescinding of the Act, Jerrilynn, for the Encouragement of Ironworks in the 1780 Pact that really had an impact on Hunter's operation? And what led to many of Hunter's gunsmiths leaving for the Fredericksburg Armory, and how did this affect the business overall?
James Hunter's operation was privately owned, and that's an important distinction between Hunter's Ironworks, Rappahannock Forge, and the Fredericksburg Armory. The Virginia government had decided they needed to build an armory, a state-run armory, and they started doing that pretty much at the outset of the Revolution, but they had to start from the ground up. Hunter's operation was already in production and able to kick right into what they needed. In 1780, when the state rescinded the protection of iron workers, that meant that because Hunter's workers were operating in a privately owned facility, they became eligible for the draft. And if they were working at a state-owned facility, i.e. the Fredericksburg Armory, they were exempt from the draft. So at that point, many of his workers just crossed the Rappahannock, went over to Fredericksburg, and found employment there rather than at Hunter's.
Let me ask you, how significant was Hunter's correspondence with Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry during this tumultuous time?
It was absolutely essential because he needed an influx of funding, an infusion of funding, and the only ones who could make that happen were Jefferson and Henry, who had some influence over the Virginia lawmakers and the General Assembly. And so it was critical that if Hunter's was going to produce items for the Revolution, it had to be on a much larger scale than he was able to bankroll on his own.
What measures did he take in response to the threat posed by General Cornwallis in 1781?
Thomas Jefferson wrote to Hunter and said that the military leaders were under the impression that Cornwallis was going to come northward and attack both the Fredericksburg Armory and Hunter's works. And so Jefferson wrote to Hunter and said, you had best get your gun-making equipment out of your facility, take it somewhere and hide it. And it appears that what Hunter did was to remove it and take it up to Stevensburg in Culpeper County. It never returned to the Rappahannock Forge, but of course, you're also, at that point in time, many of his skilled workers had gone across and taken up jobs at the Fredericksburg Armory, so there really wasn't any need to bring it back.
You know, when Jerrilynn and I return in our final segment, we're going to talk about the legacy and the loss and what brought about the decline of Hunter's Ironworks. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, Jerrilynn, wow, you're pretty prolific at writing books, and it's so wonderful having a historian join us, and you're so wonderful in articulating and explaining these issues in a very concise way. Let's talk about the factors which contributed to the decline of Hunter's Ironworks following the Revolutionary War, and how did financial troubles, delayed payments from the Virginia government impact James Hunter's legacy?
Well, Hunter was having difficulties obtaining payment from the state, certainly by 1780. In 1781, he asked Thomas Jefferson for help in getting paid for 180,000 pounds sterling for work that had been done there. So obtaining money out of a nearly bankrupt Virginia government was a challenge almost from day one, and it was just exacerbated as the war dragged on. His workers left, many of them left around 1780, as we discussed previously. And then when he was advised to remove his gun-making equipment from the facility and take it elsewhere, that really did begin the final decline of this operation.
What remains of Hunter Ironworks today? We have about 45 seconds, Jerrilynn.
Most of the canal, the 3/4-mile long canal, survives. There is the hole where the iron furnace had stood. There are a number of building foundations. The 3 tail races at the bottom of the canal still survive. And so there is still a fairly impressive physical remnant of that operation.
Do you think historically it will be remembered and preserved so people will know this story that you continue to tell?
There's an effort, and I think the Virginia 250 event will certainly help with that. Hunter's Ironworks will be the focal point of the VA 250 program here in this area.
Listen, it is a pleasure speaking to you, the birth of an iron empire. How can someone get a copy of your book?
I publish through a company called Heritage Books Incorporated, and they can go to the Heritage Books website. I publish under my maiden name, Eby, E-B-Y, Jerrilynn Eby, and they have all of my books. I have 9 in print right now.
It is a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams.
Thank you, sir.